You brat! Colonel Marcus Hale's hand shot out and shoved her hard in front of 260 soldiers. She stumbled backward. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. He pointed at the door. "Get out of my command center." She didn't move. She looked at him with the stillness of someone who had already decided how this would end. Then every screen in the building flickered simultaneously and changed. Her photograph. Her name. Her rank. Director Evelyn Carter. Joint Chiefs Authority above Top Secret. The man who just put his hands on her didn't outrank her. Nobody in that room did. Subscribe and follow this story to the end and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. The inspection had been scheduled for 6 in the morning, and by 5:55 every officer at Fort Ravenwood was already standing at attention. That was how Marcus Hale ran things. Early meant on time. On time meant late. Late meant consequences. Colonel Marcus Hale had built his reputation over 22 years of decorated service, and he wore that reputation the way other men wore skin, completely without apology, as though the world had been designed specifically to confirm what he already believed about himself. He was broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and had a voice that carried across parade grounds without effort. When he spoke, people moved. When he entered a room, conversation stopped. He had never once in his career questioned whether that kind of authority was earned or simply assumed. This morning was supposed to be routine, a classified readiness inspection, communication protocol review, chain of command verification, the kind of administrative exercise that Marcus tolerated because it looked good on quarterly reports and gave him an opportunity to remind his officers exactly how he expected things to be done. He stood at the center of the main command floor, arms behind his back, watching his staff prepare the briefing displays. Around him, captains, majors, and lieutenants moved with practiced efficiency because they knew what happened when Colonel Hale found something that displeased him. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks stood near the far wall, organizing the communication logs that Hale had requested. Daniel was 29 years old, 18 months into his assignment at Ravenwood, and still in the phase of his career where he watched everything and questioned nothing out loud. He had learned quickly that questioning things out loud around Colonel Hale was the kind of mistake a junior officer only made once. The room was full loud with the quiet tension of professional people pretending to be calm, and then the main doors opened. And everyone felt it before they saw it. Not because of noise, not because of any announcement, but because the energy in the room shifted the way it shifts when something unexpected walks through a door that was supposed to remain ordinary. She was not in formal uniform. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Gray field jacket, well worn at the elbows. Dark cargo pants with a small crease down the center that suggested they had been pressed once long ago and forgotten since. Military issue boots that had clearly seen actual field use rather than parade ground appearances. And in her left hand, a tablet, not the heavy-duty tactical model standard issue at Ravenwood, but a civilian-grade commercial unit with a cracked corner protector held on by electrical tape. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, though she carried herself in a way that made age feel irrelevant. Her brown hair was pulled back without ceremony, no jewelry, no decorations, no rank insignia visible anywhere on her jacket. She walked in like she knew exactly where she was going, and had absolutely no interest in explaining that to anyone. "Who is she?" one captain murmured to the officer beside him. "Tech support, maybe. For the communication systems." "Has to be. Look at her. She doesn't even have a badge." The whispers traveled around the room in the way whispers always do in military environments, fast, efficient, and just barely below the threshold of being heard by the wrong person. A young lieutenant named Peterson actually stepped forward, positioned himself between the woman and the main command table, because somebody clearly needed to do something about this situation. "Excuse me, ma'am," Peterson said carefully. "This briefing is restricted access. I'm going to need to see your authorization before—" "Thank you," she said without slowing down and moved past him. Peterson turned and looked helplessly at the officer behind him, who shrugged. She stopped at the far edge of the command table, set her tablet down, and began examining the data displayed on the main communication array. Not nervously, not apologetically. The way a surgeon looks at test results before deciding what to do next. Daniel watched this from his position near the wall. Something about her bothered him, though he couldn't immediately identify what. It wasn't that she looked dangerous. It wasn't that she looked careless. It was that she looked completely, absolutely unbothered by the fact that she was in a room full of armed military personnel who were all staring at her like she had made a navigation error. Marcus Hale had not yet turned around. He was still reviewing the morning's briefing packet with Major Calloway, his senior logistics officer, and making the particular kind of annotations in the margins that meant someone was going to have a very unpleasant afternoon. But the murmur in the room had changed pitch, and Marcus Hale had spent 22 years learning to read rooms by sound alone. He turned. He saw her. His expression did not change immediately. He took 3 full seconds to assess the situation. The civilian clothing, the unauthorized tablet, the casual disregard for every protocol he had spent years enforcing in that room. Then his face shifted into the expression his officers privately called the glacier. Cold, deliberate, immovable. He walked toward her. The room parted for him the way water parts for something very dense moving through it. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It carried across the room the way thunder carries, not because it tries, but because that's simply what it is. She didn't look up from the screen. He stopped 3 feet away from her. "I'm speaking to you." "I know," she said. "I'm finishing a thought." The room produced a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite silence, but existed somewhere between the two. Several officers looked at each other with expressions that communicated simultaneously, "Did she just, and does she know who that is? And this is going to be very bad for her." Marcus Hale had not been spoken to that way by a subordinate in 11 years. He remembered the last time, precisely because of what had happened to the man who did it. "You're going to want to put down whatever it is you're doing," he said, "and explain to me who authorized your entry into my command briefing." She set the tablet down, turned to face him fully. "I was authorized by the Oversight Command," she said. "I'm here to conduct a system review." "System review?" Marcus repeated. "Yes." "On whose authority?" "On the authority of the office that sent me." Marcus tilted his head approximately 2 degrees to the left, which his staff had learned to interpret as a warning sign, roughly equivalent to a pressure gauge entering the red zone. "I don't know what office you think gave you authority to walk into a classified briefing without proper identification, without coordination with my staff, and without the courtesy of notifying me. The coordination request was submitted 4 days ago," she said, "through standard oversight channels. If your administrative staff didn't process it, that's worth looking into, but it doesn't affect my authorization." The silence in the room became a different quality of silence, the kind that precedes something significant. "Your name," Marcus said. "Carter," she said. "Dr. Evelyn Carter." He waited. "That doesn't mean anything to me." "I know," she said. And somehow those 2 words delivered without inflection, without smugness, without anything except a kind of calm, factual acknowledgement, were more irritating than any challenge could have been. Marcus turned to Major Calloway. "Get me her credentials. I want confirmation of this alleged authorization in the next 2 minutes, or I want her removed." "Of course, sir." Calloway moved immediately. Evelyn watched this, and then turned back to the screen. "Your primary communication relay is running a routing protocol that creates a 17-second gap in emergency transmission under high-load conditions," she said to the room in general, the way a doctor might announce test results not dramatically, but with the weight of something that actually matters. "If you're operating during a high-stress scenario, which is precisely when your emergency communication would be needed, you lose 17 seconds of coordination capability. At Ravenwood's operational tempo, that's enough time for a great deal to go wrong." A junior officer near the back of the room said quietly but audibly, "That's actually correct. I flagged something similar in last month's diagnostic report." 3 people immediately looked at him with expressions suggesting he should stop talking. Marcus turned back toward Evelyn. "This is not the time or place for unauthorized technical commentary." "Whatever concerns you believe you have, I don't believe I have them," she said. "I documented them, 15 minutes ago, when I first accessed the system. You accessed the system without authorization. I accessed the system with my authorization, which again was submitted 4 days ago. Daniel watched Marcus's jaw tighten. He had seen Hale in difficult conversations before. He had seen generals try to push back on him and come away looking smaller than they had arrived. He had never seen anyone respond to Marcus Hale the way this woman was responding, not with aggression, not with deference, but with something that felt almost like patience. The patience of someone who had done this before and already knew how it ended. Major Calloway returned. His face was doing something complicated. "Sir," he said, "I've contacted the administrative office. There's no record of a coordination request in the standard filing system." "Exactly," Marcus said. "Which means, however," Calloway continued, "I contacted the Secondary Oversight Coordination Channel, which is apparently separate from our standard system, and the request was filed there 4 days ago with full documentation." Silence. "The secondary channel," Marcus repeated. "Yes, sir. It's apparently the Special Operations Oversight Command uses a separate submission protocol. Our administrative staff were not aware." Something crossed Marcus's face, the first flicker of uncertainty. He looked at Evelyn. "You said Oversight Command." "Yes." "Special Operations Oversight." "Yes." "That office has not sent anyone to Ravenwood in 7 years, she said. "I know. The last review was in 2017. The office has since been reorganized and expanded. We now have broader operational authority and a new mandate from the Joint Chiefs." The phrase Joint Chiefs did something to the air in the room. It landed the way the name of something very powerful lands when you weren't expecting it. "I want to see your identification," Marcus said. "Now." "Of course." She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket, produced a credentials folder, the kind with a hard dark cover, and an embedded security chip. She held it out. He looked at it. His expression for the first time did something it almost never did in public. It shifted. "This is Director-level clearance," she said. "TS/SCI with special category access. Oversight authority over all Fort Ravenwood operational systems and personnel records, including yours, Colonel." Marcus closed the credentials folder. He did not return it. He stood there for a moment that lasted approximately 3 seconds, but felt considerably longer. Then something happened that nobody in that room had been expecting. His face reassembled into the glacier, and he said, "I don't care what that card says." Every person in the room went very still. "I have run this command for 4 years without intervention from any oversight body, and I will not have my morning briefing disrupted by a civilian with a piece of plastic and an attitude problem." "I'm not a civilian," she said. "You're not in my chain of command." "I'm above your chain of command." That was the moment he reached out and pushed her. Not a shove. Not a violent attack, but deliberate. His right hand made contact with her left shoulder, with enough force to move her backward 2 steps. The kind of physical dismissal that is designed to communicate clearly and publicly and unmistakably that this person does not matter enough to engage with any further. The room stopped breathing. Evelyn regained her balance, set her feet. She had not dropped the tablet. She had not lost her composure. Her expression had not changed. She looked at him. "Colonel," she said quietly, "you may want to check the primary display before you decide what happens next." He was about to respond, and then every screen in the room changed simultaneously. The briefing displays, the communication array monitors, the overhead tactical screens. Every piece of display technology in the Fort Ravenwood main command center flickered once and then populated with the same image. Not a technical readout, not a system error, a security clearance profile. And across the top of every screen in letters large enough to read from across the room. Director Evelyn Carter, Special Operations Oversight Command, Joint Chiefs, Authority. Clearance level above Top Secret Special Category. Operational Authority. All Continental Divisions. Beneath the text, a photograph. Her photograph. The same woman standing 2 feet in front of him whose shoulder he had just laid a hand on in front of approximately 260 witnesses. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, standing against the far wall, felt the blood drain out of his face in the particular way it does when you suddenly understand that something you are watching is not going to end in a minor embarrassment, but in something considerably more consequential. Is that the oversight system," someone whispered. "It auto-authenticated," another voice said, barely audible. When she entered the room, the system it recognized her biometrics automatically. It's been running a background authentication since she walked in. Her clearance level is above the base commanders by several levels. Marcus Hale stood looking at the screens. He looked at them for a long time. Then he looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked back at him, and she said still quietly, still without anger, without triumph, without anything except the steady weight of simple fact. "I came here to help you, Colonel. I found problems that could cost soldiers their lives. I tried to tell you that." She picked up her tablet. "I'll continue my review. When you're ready to discuss the findings, I'll be in the secondary operations room." She walked past him. Past 260 silent, motionless officers, and nobody in that room made a sound until the door closed behind her. Then slowly, the room began to breathe again. Daniel Brooks looked at the screens, still displaying her profile, still listing an authority level that made Marcus Hale's rank look like a footnote. He thought about the way she had walked in. The cracked tablet case. The worn boots. The complete absolute absence of any desire to make an impression. He thought about the 17-second gap in the emergency communication relay that she had identified in 15 minutes that nobody else had caught in months. And he thought for the first time in his career that he might be looking at what actual leadership looked like. Not the kind that fills a room with its own reputation. The kind that already knows exactly what's wrong before it walks through the door. Marcus Hale was still standing in the center of the room. The screens still displayed her name, and somewhere in the building in the secondary operations room, Evelyn Carter was already working. Because that's what she had come here to do. And she had a great deal more to find. The secondary operations room had been used maybe a dozen times in the past year. Daniel knew this because he had personally signed off on the maintenance logs, and the logs showed a room that mostly collected dust between quarterly system checks. Nobody held important meetings there. It was the kind of space that existed on paper and in floor plans, and nowhere else that mattered. Until today. He stood outside the door for 30 seconds before knocking. Which was unusual for him because Daniel Brooks was not the kind of man who hesitated. 18 months at Ravenwood had trained that impulse out of him. You moved, you executed, you did not stand in hallways second-guessing yourself. Colonel Hale had made that expectation very clear in the first week. But nothing about the last 40 minutes had felt like anything Daniel had a protocol for. He knocked. "Come in," she said. She was seated at the secondary terminal, but she wasn't using it. She was working from her own tablet, the cracked corner civilian unit, and she had 3 separate windows open simultaneously, the kind of multitasking that people do when they've trained themselves to hold several problems in their minds at once and move between them without losing thread. She didn't look up when he entered. "Lieutenant Brooks," she said, "close the door." He did. "You know my name," he said. "I know everyone's name in this building. I've been reviewing your personnel file since last Tuesday." He wasn't sure how he felt about that, so he filed the feeling away for later and focused on the immediate situation. "I wanted to," he started. "Apologize," she said. "Don't. You didn't push me. You didn't say anything inappropriate. You had no idea who I was, and you behaved with considerably more professional restraint than most people in that room. I meant I wanted to ask if you were all right." She looked up then. It was a brief look, the kind that evaluates something quickly and completely. "I'm fine," she said. Then after a pause that felt deliberate, "Thank you for asking." She went back to the tablet. "Sit down if you want. I'm not going to bite you. But if you're here because Hale sent you, this conversation is going to be very short." "He didn't send me," Daniel said. "I don't think he's sent anyone. I think he's still standing in the command center trying to decide what the next 4 hours look like. He has about 2 days before that decision becomes irrelevant," she said. "More or less." Daniel sat down in the chair across from her. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer immediately. She pulled up something on the tablet, looked at it for a moment, then set it face down on the table. "What did Hale tell you about this inspection?" she asked. "Standard Readiness Review, Communication Protocol Audit." He framed it as a routine administrative exercise. "Right." She folded her hands. "And did that framing feel accurate to you?" Daniel measured his words carefully. "I had questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind you don't ask out loud around Colonel Hale." She studied him. "You've been filing internal observation logs." He went very still. "Those are confidential?" "Yes, I know. I have the clearance to read them, and I did." She leaned forward slightly. "Lieutenant Brooks, you have been documenting communication irregularities, missing maintenance reports, and what you described in your June 15th entry as a pattern of selectively incomplete operational records for 7 months, and you have sent exactly 0 of those logs through any official reporting channel." The room held that statement for a moment. "Because I didn't know if the problem was contained to my department," Daniel said finally, "or if it went higher." "It goes higher," she said. She said it simply the way you say something that is terrible but true, without drama, without the kind of emphasis that tries to make information feel more important than it already is. Daniel sat with that. "How high?" "I'm still determining that, which is why I need you to do something that's going to feel uncomfortable." "What?" "Keep your head down for the next 48 hours. Don't tell Hale anything about this conversation. Don't tell anyone. Go back to your normal duties, complete your normal tasks, file your normal reports. And if anyone asks you where you were for the last 20 minutes, you were in the communications bay doing a systems cross-check." "You want me to lie to my commanding officer?" "I want you to protect an active investigation," she said. "There is a meaningful legal distinction, and I am prepared to document it in writing if that would help you sleep better." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've done this before," he said. "Frequently. Walked into places where everyone thought you were nobody. It's one of the more useful things about not needing people to know who I am." He was quiet. Then, "The 17-second gap you mentioned, in the communication relay." "Yes. That's real. I ran the diagnostics 3 months ago and flagged it in my observation log. My supervisor told me I had miscalculated. I ran it again. Same result. I was told not to run it a 3rd time." "Who was your supervisor?" "Major Calloway." She wrote something on her tablet. 1 word it looked like. Maybe 2. "Thank you," she said. "That's very helpful. Is Calloway?" Daniel stopped. Started again. "Is this about Calloway, or is this about Hale?" She looked at him steadily. "Right now it's about a 17-second gap in an emergency communication relay that, if activated during a live operational crisis, could prevent rescue coordination from functioning correctly. If we fix that problem before anyone gets hurt, I don't particularly care how many careers end afterward. But yes, both of them are part of what I'm looking at." Daniel nodded slowly. The weight of the last 7 months, the logs he had written and never sent, the questions he had buried, the conversations he had carefully avoided, shifted into something different. Not lighter exactly, but with a shape now, instead of just a vague pressing mass of wrong. "Okay," he said. "I'll stay out of it." "One more thing," she said. "The system failure scenario. The one on the emergency preparedness simulation calendar for 48 hours from now. The large-scale exercise, the full communications drill. Yes. I need you to pay attention to who does what in the first 3 minutes after the simulated failure activates. Who goes to which terminal? Who initiates which override sequences? Don't write it down. Just watch and remember." "Why?" "Because," she said, and she picked up the tablet again. "I already know what's supposed to happen. I need to know what actually does." Daniel stood, moved toward the door, stopped. "One question," he said. "Go ahead. That clearance, the auto-authentication. Did the system recognize you the moment you walked in, or did you trigger it deliberately?" She didn't answer right away. And in that pause, Daniel understood something without being told. "You knew he was going to push you." Daniel said quietly. Still nothing. You needed witnesses. You needed it on camera. You needed the whole room to see the authentication trigger at exactly that moment. She looked up from the tablet. Her expression did not confirm or deny. It simply acknowledged with the economy of someone who has learned to communicate precisely that he was not entirely wrong. Close the door on your way out, Lieutenant. He did. And walking back toward the command center, Daniel Brooks thought about what it meant to be the kind of person who could walk into a room already knowing how it would end. Marcus Hale was waiting for him, not in the hallway. In the command center, standing near Daniel's workstation, with the particular quality of stillness that Marcus had when he was controlling something he did not want anyone to see. Walk with me, Marcus said. They walked, out of the main command center down the eastern corridor into Marcus's private briefing room. The door closed. Marcus stood facing the window rather than Daniel. What did she say to you? Marcus asked. I went to confirm she had access to the secondary systems, Daniel said. Standard protocol when an unverified user is operating in a restricted environment. A beat. And, her access is confirmed, sir. Director-level authorization. The secondary terminal logged her in with full operational read permissions. Marcus was quiet for a long time. You were in there for 20 minutes, he said. The system confirmation took time, sir. The secondary authorization channel runs through a different server. Marcus turned from the window. He looked at Daniel with the specific expression of a man who has made his career reading other people and is currently deciding whether what he is reading is accurate. She flagged the communication relay, Marcus said. The gap in the emergency routing protocol. Yes, sir. That report was reviewed by Major Calloway 6 weeks ago. He determined there was no significant vulnerability. Yes, sir. You ran your own diagnostic, in March. Daniel kept his face completely neutral. I run routine diagnostics as part of my duties, sir. And what did your diagnostic show? The silence stretched to 4 seconds, which in a conversation with Marcus Hale was an enormous amount of time. It showed that Calloway's assessment was consistent with the system parameters, Daniel said carefully. Marcus studied him. Then something happened in his expression that Daniel had never seen before. A hairline fracture, barely visible. The kind of thing you only catch if you're paying close attention. She's not here for a routine review, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. She came with Joint Chief's authorization, Daniel said. That suggests elevated priority. I know what it suggests. Marcus's voice was flat. I want to know what she actually found. I don't have that information, sir. Another silence. Stay available, Marcus said. I may need you. Of course, sir. Daniel walked out. He was steady until he turned the corner. Then he stopped, put his back against the wall and stood there for a moment breathing carefully. Because what he had just done, the thing he had told himself, was the legally distinct act of protecting an investigation, rather than lying, was the most consequential choice he had made in 18 months at Ravenwood. And he was not entirely sure it was going to end well for him. In her office 2 floors down, Major Vivian Solis was reading the authorization profile for the 4th time. Solis ran the base's Administrative Processing Division, which meant she was the person responsible for the coordination request that had apparently been submitted 4 days ago through a channel her office hadn't known existed. She had already received in the last hour alone 3 separate calls from different senior officers asking the same question. Why hadn't she processed the oversight notification? Her answer that the request had been filed through the Special Operations Oversight Secondary Channel, which her office had not been given access credentials for, was accurate. It was also, she was beginning to understand, not going to satisfy anyone. She put the authorization profile down. She picked up her phone and called Marcus Hale's direct line. "Colonel," she said when he answered, "I need 5 minutes." "I'm occupied, Solis." "I know. This is about the Carter situation. I found something in the administrative archive that you need to see." A pause. "My office. Now." She arrived with a printed copy of what she had found, because she had learned years ago that Marcus Hale trusted paper more than screens when it came to information he was deciding how to use. She laid it on his desk. The secondary oversight channel has been active for 14 months, she said. It was established when the Oversight Command was reorganized. The notification of its creation was sent through Joint Chiefs Administrative Relay, which routes to senior commanders. Marcus looked at the paper. "To my office," he said. "Yes, sir." "And I didn't receive it." "That's what the record indicates, sir. The notification was sent, but there's no confirmation of receipt in your administrative log." Marcus read the document, read it again. Something worked behind his eyes that Solis couldn't quite interpret. "Who has access to my administrative receipt log?" he said. She had not expected that question. She had expected questions about Carter, about the oversight channel, about the coordination request, not about his internal receipt log. "Standard access would include your executive assistant and Major Calloway, who has deputy administrative authority," she said carefully. Marcus set the paper down. "Thank you, Solis," he said. His voice was very controlled. "Close the door on your way out." She did. And alone in his office, Marcus Hale sat very still and thought about what it meant that a Joint Chiefs notification had been sent to his office and had not appeared in his records. He thought about his administrative log. He thought about Calloway. He thought about the 6-week-old assessment of the communication relay vulnerability. He thought about a 17-second gap that his senior logistics officer had told him did not exist. And for the first time in 4 years of running Fort Ravenwood, Marcus Hale felt the ground shift under his feet. Not because of Evelyn Carter, because of what she was finding. Evelyn at that moment was not in the secondary operations room. She was in the communications bay standing next to the chief systems technician, a 34-year-old warrant officer named Gaines, who had the particular energy of someone who has been waiting a very long time for someone to ask him the right questions. "You flagged this system," she said. "3 times, Gaines said. "In writing, with supporting diagnostics attached." "And the flags were marked as resolved." "By Major Calloway's office, yes ma'am, each time within 48 hours. Which is actually, real resolutions take longer. When you actually fix something in a system this complex, it takes time. 48-hour resolutions on 3 separate flags that all relate to the same underlying protocol issue. Means they weren't resolved," she said. "They were closed." "Yes, ma'am, exactly." He looked at her with the careful relief of someone who has been dismissed so many times that being heard feels almost suspicious. "That's exactly what I've been trying to say." "Who signed the resolution documentation?" "Calloway's name is on it, but the signature code in the system traces to a terminal he didn't have logged access to during 2 of the 3 dates." She looked at him sharply. "You trace the signature codes?" "I know how to do my job, ma'am." "Yes," she said. "You do." She looked at the terminal. "Send me everything, all 3 flags, the resolution documents, the signature code traces. Send them to the secure upload address that's registered in the secondary oversight system." "You have an address in the secondary system?" "I set it up 14 months ago when the command was reorganized," she said, "along with the oversight coordination channel and several other things that were apparently never communicated down the chain." Gaines hesitated. "If I send this and Calloway finds out—" "Gaines," she said, "look at the screen behind you." He turned. The secondary terminal at his station was still displaying her clearance profile from the earlier auto-authentication, which had propagated across the base network. "If Major Calloway has a problem with information being sent to my secure channel," she said, "he is welcome to bring that problem directly to me." Gaines turned back to his workstation and started uploading. Evelyn's phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked at the screen. The number was one she had given to exactly 3 people, all of whom were not at Fort Ravenwood. She stepped into the corridor to take the call. "Carter," she said. "It's Mercer." The voice on the other end belonged to General Thomas Mercer, her direct supervisor at the Oversight Command. He was 61 years old, had the voice of a man who had stopped being surprised by things sometime in the late 1990s, and was one of approximately 4 people on the planet whose calls Evelyn always answered immediately. "I got the alert from your auto-authentication. You triggered it deliberately." "The situation called for it," she said. Hale laid hands on you in front of 260 personnel. I'm aware. Are you filing a formal report? I'm filing a full operational report when the review is complete. The physical incident will be included. A pause. You're letting it wait. I need him functional for 48 more hours, she said. If I go formal now, he goes into administrative suspension. His access is restricted, and I lose visibility into how he responds to what I'm finding. I need to see what he does next. And what are you finding? She stepped further into the corridor and lowered her voice slightly. The communication relay vulnerability is real and documented. The resolution records have been falsified. Signature codes don't match authorized terminal access on at least 2 of 3 documented dates. I have 7 months of observation logs from a junior officer who noticed the pattern and was shut down when he tried to raise it. And I've just been informed that a Joint Chief's notification about this office was sent to Hale's administrative address 14 months ago with no confirmed receipt. Someone buried it. Yes. Hale. I don't know yet. It may be someone managing information flow around him rather than under his direction. I need the next 48 hours to determine which. Mercer was quiet for a moment. The exercise drill, the full communications simulation, is still on schedule, she said. I need it to run. Don't let anyone cancel it. Understood. Anything else? Keep everyone quiet at your end for 2 more days, she said. If this gets elevated before I've completed the review, I lose the window. I'll hold the line, he said. But Carter, be careful. If someone has been managing information flow in that building for over a year, they're watching for exactly this kind of review. I know, she said. They've been watching for it since I walked in the door. She paused. They just didn't know what I was watching for. She ended the call, walked back into the communications bay. Gaines, she said. One more thing. The exercise drill in 48 hours. During the simulation, when the failure sequence activates, what's the standard override protocol? He told her. She listened carefully. Then she asked, and if someone bypassed the standard override, if they initiated a non-standard emergency reroute through the secondary relay? Gaines frowned. Then the primary system would read it as a false recovery. It would appear to fix itself, but the underlying fault would still be there. You'd have a system that looks operational, but has a 17-second gap that you can't see on the diagnostic display because the non-standard reroute masks it. And if that happened during a real emergency instead of a simulation, during a real emergency, you'd have rescue coordination appearing to function normally on every screen in this building, he said slowly, while actually failing invisibly at the relay point. You'd have teams calling for support, and the support thinking the calls were getting through, and nobody would know the difference until it was too late, she said. Gaines had gone very pale. Ma'am, he said, is that what's been happening? She looked at him. That, she said quietly, is what I'm here to find out. The clock on the wall said 11:47 in the morning. She had been at Fort Ravenwood for 5 hours and 47 minutes, and she had already found enough to end careers. The question was not what she had found. The question was what someone was going to do about it before she could finish. The next morning arrived, the way mornings do, when something is already in motion with a kind of surface normalcy that doesn't quite hold if you press on it. Daniel arrived at his workstation at 5:45 before his usual time, because he had not slept well, and lying in the dark, thinking about Calloway's signature codes, was considerably worse than being at his desk doing something. He ran a systems check, filed 2 routine reports, drank bad coffee from the commissary, and pretended to be exactly what he was supposed to look like, a junior officer completing his morning duties without anything unusual on his mind. Marcus Hale arrived at 6 on the dot as always and said nothing to anyone for the first 20 minutes. This was also normal. What was not normal was the way he looked at Calloway when the major entered the command center at 6:12. A look Daniel only caught because he happened to be facing the right direction at the right moment. A look that lasted approximately 1 second, and contained in that 1 second something that Daniel had never seen in Marcus Hale's face. Suspicion. Not the operational suspicion of a commander assessing a situation. Something older, more personal. The kind of suspicion that arrives when you've started to ask questions about someone you trusted, and the answers are coming back wrong. Calloway, for his part, was doing an excellent impression of a man who had nothing on his mind. He set down his briefing folder, exchanged a few words with a captain near the far terminal, poured himself coffee from the same pot as Daniel, and behaved in every visible way, like a man who had slept easily and arrived at work unconcerned. Daniel watched both of them and said nothing, and understood in the precise and detailed way that careful observers understand things that the command center of Fort Ravenwood was operating on two completely separate levels this morning. The surface level, which looked normal, and the level underneath which was already fracturing. At 7:30, Evelyn appeared. She walked into the command center without announcement set up at a secondary terminal in the northeast corner, not the main command table, not anywhere that required anyone to acknowledge her, and began working. She had the cracked tablet and a second device Daniel hadn't seen yesterday, something thicker and more armored with a biometric lock on the side. Nobody approached her. Calloway looked at her once, a careful look, the kind that tries to assess without appearing to assess. Then he looked back at his work. Marcus did not look at her at all, which Daniel thought was itself a kind of statement. At 8:15, Evelyn's phone lit up. She read the screen, stood, and walked to the center of the room. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with the kind of purposeful, unhurried movement that she seemed to use for everything. "I need to address the room," she said. The room produced the particular silence that happens when a grenade has been set on a table and everyone is waiting to find out if it's live. Marcus turned from his position near the main display. "You have the floor, Director," he said. And the way he said director carefully with full acknowledgement of her title, without any of yesterday's dismissal, told Daniel something significant. Something had happened between last night and this morning. Something had shifted in Marcus Hale's calculation. "Thank you," she said. "I've completed the initial phase of my communication systems review. I want to share 3 findings with this room. Not because I'm required to share them at this stage of a review, but because the third one has a 48-hour window, and every person in this command needs to understand what they're operating with." She held up the armored device. The screen was visible just barely to those closest to her. Finding 1. The primary communication relay has an active routing vulnerability that creates a 17-second gap in emergency transmission under high-load conditions. This vulnerability was flagged internally on 3 separate occasions. The flag resolutions on record do not match authorized system activity on at least 2 of those dates, which means the vulnerability was not fixed. The paperwork says it was. The system says otherwise. Nobody moved. Finding 2. The Joint Chiefs notification establishing this office's secondary oversight channel was transmitted to this command 14 months ago. That notification did not appear in the base commander's administrative receipt log. I am investigating whether that represents a transmission failure, an administrative error, or deliberate information suppression. The word deliberate landed in the room like a physical object. Finding 3. She paused. Not for effect, Evelyn Carter did not appear to use pauses for effect. She paused because what came next required precision. The large-scale communications exercise scheduled for tomorrow morning is not a simulation anymore. I have requested and received Joint Chiefs authorization to convert it to a live operational stress test. The parameters will be identical to the scheduled exercise. The data collection and evaluation criteria will not. Everything that happens tomorrow is on record. Every action, every terminal access, every override sequence, every command decision recorded, time-stamped, and transmitted directly to Oversight Command in real time, Marcus said. "You converted my scheduled exercise to a live operational review without consulting me." "I'm consulting you now," she said. "That is not Colonel Hale." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "I have Joint Chiefs authorization. I have documented evidence of a falsified safety record in this command. And I have a 48-hour window before the exercise runs, during which I am making every senior officer in this building aware of exactly what tomorrow is going to be. That is more transparency than I'm required to provide. I'm providing it because I believe most of the people in this room deserve to know what they're walking into. She looked around the room slowly. Most, she repeated, and then she walked back to her terminal. The room exhaled. Calloway was very still. Daniel watched him. The way Calloway held himself after that word most was the kind of stillness that has thought behind it. Calculation. The specific quality of a man who has just been told the building is on fire and is quietly deciding which way to run. 40 minutes later, Calloway left the command center. Daniel waited 90 seconds, then sent a message to the secure upload address Evelyn had mentioned. Not from his primary device. From the secondary communications tablet he used for encrypted internal correspondence, because he had, in a moment of foresight 7 months ago, quietly gotten himself access to that channel while filing a routine diagnostic request. One line he just left. Heading East Corridor. The reply came back in 40 seconds. One word. Watching. He set the tablet face down and went back to his reports. Evelyn received the message, read it, and did not change expression. She had 2 cameras in the East Corridor covering the route between the command center and Calloway's office, activated through the base's own security system under her oversight authority. She did not need to follow him. She needed to know where he went and who he spoke to and in what sequence. The camera feed showed Calloway stopping outside his office, not going in. Standing in the corridor with his phone out, not calling through the base's internal system, using his personal device. She photographed the screen of the corridor camera feed and sent it to Mercer's secure line with 4 words. Personal device. Documented. Mercer's response, already flagged. She set her phone face down and continued working. By 10 o'clock, 3 things happened in quick succession. First, Captain Reyes from the Eastern Communications Division arrived at her terminal without being summoned and set a printed document on the desk beside her tablet. He did not speak. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to communicate that the document was intentional and deliberate, and then walked away. She picked it up. It was a duplicate of a maintenance resolution form dated 6 weeks prior, with a note handwritten in the margin. Original signature does not match Calloway's authorized code. I have the comparison documentation. Second, Evelyn's armored device received an automated alert from the Oversight Command's document monitoring system. Someone had attempted to access the secondary oversight channel from an internal Fort Ravenwood terminal without proper authorization. The attempt had failed. The terminal ID was logged. She looked at the terminal ID. It belonged to an office on the 3rd floor, Marcus Hale's office. She sat with that for a moment. Then she called Mercer. Someone tried to access the secondary channel from Hale's office terminal, she said. Hale, or someone with access to his office, which from the base personnel records includes his executive assistant Major Calloway as Deputy Administrative Authority and the building maintenance staff. Could Hale be trying to understand what you have? Possibly. Or someone is trying to find out what the channel contains, and they use the most conveniently accessible terminal. You think it's Calloway? I think Calloway knows something is wrong and is trying to assess his exposure, she said. Whether Hale knows Calloway used his terminal is a different question. What do you need? Nothing yet. Let it run. Tomorrow's exercise is going to tell me more in 3 hours than I can learn in 3 days of document review. Third, at 11:15, Marcus Hale appeared at her terminal. He stood there until she looked up. Sit down, Colonel, she said. He sat, which was itself remarkable. Marcus Hale did not sit in chairs that other people offered him. He chose his own positions. He occupied spaces on his own terms. The fact that he lowered himself into the chair across from her secondary terminal said something that neither of them addressed directly. The attempted channel access from your office terminal, she said. I need to know if that was you. He looked at her steadily. It was not. Do you know who it was? I have a strong suspicion. Do you want to share that suspicion? He was quiet for a moment. The quality of his silence had changed from yesterday. Yesterday, it was the silence of a man who believed he controlled everything in his proximity. Today, it was the silence of a man who was recalibrating. 6 weeks ago, he said, I asked Calloway to review the communication relay diagnostic. He came back with a clean assessment, told me the junior officer's analysis was incorrect. Did you review the supporting documentation yourself? No. He said it without flinching. I trusted my senior logistics officer's evaluation. That is standard command practice. It is, she agreed. And if someone wanted to bury a safety vulnerability inside standard command practice, that would be the place to do it. Marcus looked at her. You're not just investigating the relay. No. You came here because something larger was flagged. I came here because 7 months of internal observation logs from a junior officer showed a pattern consistent with deliberate information suppression inside this command. She said, the relay vulnerability is a symptom. I'm looking for the source. His jaw tightened. And you believe the source is inside my staff. I believe it's been operating inside your staff for approximately 14 months, starting from when the oversight notification disappeared from your administrative log. She looked at him carefully. Colonel, I want to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Go ahead. Did you know the oversight channel existed before I walked in yesterday? A pause. 4 seconds. 5. No, he said. She studied his face. Not for deception, she had been reading faces for 15 years, and she had learned that the deliberate search for deception produced false results. She read faces the way she read systems, by looking for what didn't match. What she saw in Marcus Hale's face was anger. Not at her. At something behind her. At something he was still constructing in his mind, from pieces that were only now assembling into a complete picture. You believe me, he said. I'm deciding whether to, she said. There's a difference. Something shifted in his expression, a grudging acknowledgement. What do you need from me for tomorrow? He asked. Your normal behavior. Run the exercise the way you would run any drill. Don't deviate from your standard command protocols. Don't warn your staff about the real-time data transmission. And Calloway. Especially don't warn Calloway, she said. Marcus nodded, started to stand. Colonel, she said. He stopped. Yesterday morning, she said. The room. I need you to understand something. He looked at her. Something behind his eyes braced. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, she said. Because it's on every camera in that building, and it will be part of the operational record. But I am telling you, as the person responsible for this review, that what happens tomorrow matters more than what happened yesterday. Accountability runs in both directions. Your conduct in the next 48 hours is part of what I'm going to report. He held her gaze for a long moment. I understand, he said, and then quietly, with none of the performance of yesterday's command presence. I'm sorry for yesterday. It was wrong. She nodded once. He left. She turned back to the terminal. That night at 2200 hours, 2 things happened that Evelyn didn't learn about until morning. The first was that Gaines, working late in the communications bay, found a secondary modification in the relay system's routing architecture. Not the 17-second gap she already knew about. Something new. A bypass sequence embedded 3 layers deep in the emergency override protocol. The kind of modification that required not just access, but specific technical knowledge of how the system's architecture was built. It was designed to activate automatically under the precise conditions of a large-scale communications failure. When it activated, it would generate false confirmation signals on the diagnostic displays. Every operator would see a system that appeared to be recovering. Meanwhile, the actual relay would continue to fail invisibly. Gaines sent the documentation to Evelyn's secure upload address at 2247. She read it at 2315 from her temporary quarters, sitting on the edge of the bed with the armored device in her hands, and felt the cold, specific clarity of understanding something she had suspected, but not yet confirmed. This was not a maintenance failure. This was not negligence. Someone had built a trap inside Fort Ravenwood's emergency communication system. built it carefully technically with full knowledge of what would happen if it activated during a real crisis. Not a simulation. A real one. The second thing that happened that night, Calloway's personal device sent 3 outgoing messages between 2300 and midnight. She knew this because Mercer had flagged his number for carrier-level monitoring after the corridor incident, which was within Oversight Command's authority under the active investigation protocols. She couldn't read the messages. The encryption was good, but she had the recipients. 2 of them she didn't recognize. The third one, she did. She sat with that knowledge for a long time. Then she called Mercer. "You saw the recipients?" she said when he picked up. "Yes." His voice was the voice of someone who had also not been sleeping. "Carter. That third number." "I know." "If that's who I think it is." "It's who you think it is," she said. "Then this goes higher than Calloway." "Yes." A silence. "How high?" he asked. I don't know yet," she said. "But I'm about to find out, because whoever that is, whatever their role in this, they just told Calloway something. And Calloway is going to walk into that exercise tomorrow, having received instructions in the last 12 hours. You want to let it run. I need to see what those instructions tell him to do," she said. "Because if someone told Calloway how to manage tomorrow's exercise, what to do when the system fails, what sequence to activate, what to show on the diagnostic displays, then tomorrow is not just a communications drill anymore." She paused. "Tomorrow is when we find out how deep this actually goes." She set the device down. Outside the base was quiet. 300 soldiers sleeping or trying to. Tomorrow they would run what they believed was a standard communications exercise. They would not know that every action was being recorded in real time and transmitted to the Joint Chiefs. They would not know that the exercise had become the final movement of something that had been building for 14 months. They would not know that the system they trusted to protect them had been deliberately compromised. Evelyn lay back on the bed without changing clothes. She thought about the trap in the relay architecture. She thought about Calloway's messages. She thought about the third recipient's number. And she thought about what it meant to walk into a room where someone had already decided what was going to happen to you. She had done it once yesterday in the command center with 260 witnesses. Tomorrow she was going to do it again. Except this time the stakes were not a matter of rank or career or wounded pride. The clock on the wall said 12:41. In 7 hours and 19 minutes the exercise would begin. And everything that had been hidden for 14 months was finally going to surface. The exercise began at 0700 exactly. Marcus Hale called it with the same voice he used for everything. Flat, authoritative brooking, no variation. And the command center activated around him the way it always did. Officers moving to stations, terminals, coming live communication channels opening across the base's operational network. From the outside, from any position in that room, it looked like every other large-scale drill Fort Ravenwood had run in the last 4 years. Evelyn stood at her secondary terminal in the northeast corner and watched. She did not touch her tablet. She did not make notes. She simply watched the room the way a person watches a fire they have already decided they will not put out until it has burned away everything that needs to burn. Daniel was at his assigned station 3 terminals down from Calloway, which was exactly where Evelyn had asked him to be without asking him directly. She had simply mentioned the previous afternoon that the Eastern Communication Bank would be the most active monitoring point during a high-load simulation. Daniel had processed that information and positioned himself accordingly, which told her something about his instincts that she filed away for a different conversation. Calloway was running his station with the smooth efficiency of a man who had prepared. Not the preparation of someone ready to perform his duties well. The preparation of someone who knows exactly what is coming and has decided exactly what he is going to do about it. Evelyn saw it in his hands. The way they moved between the terminal controls with a certainty that was a fraction too precise. Normal operators during a drill showed micro-hesitations, the small pauses of people making real-time decisions. Calloway had no hesitations. He was executing a sequence he had already run in his head. At 7:14, the first simulated failure activated. The primary communication relay dropped across sectors 3 through 7, exactly as the exercise parameters specified. Warning tones sounded. Status boards shifted to amber. The room elevated from operational baseline to controlled urgency, the particular register of trained professionals encountering a problem they have prepared for. Sector relay is down, called the communications officer at the main board. Switching to emergency protocol alpha. Confirm the switch, Marcus said. Confirmed, sir. Status on the backup relay. Backup is, sir. Backup relay is responding. Emergency protocol initiated. Evelyn looked at the diagnostic displays. They showed a clean recovery. The system, according to every screen in the command center, was functioning. Emergency Protocol Alpha had activated, the backup relay had responded, and the communication network appeared to be restoring across the affected sectors. She looked at her armored device. The real-time data feed from the Oversight Command's independent monitoring system told a completely different story. The actual relay, 3 layers below what the diagnostic displays were showing, had not recovered. The 17-second gap was active. The false confirmation signals that Gaines had found embedded in the bypass sequence were feeding clean data to every terminal in the room. The trap had activated. Every officer in the command center believed the system was working. It was not. She waited. At 7:19, Calloway made his move. It was subtle. The kind of thing that looks like standard procedure if you're not watching for it. He entered a 12-character override sequence into the secondary routing terminal, not the primary, not the emergency backup, the secondary. The terminal that under normal exercise parameters would not be accessed during this phase of the drill. He entered it fast with the practiced speed of someone who has memorized the sequence, and the terminal registered the input and returned a confirmation status. Evelyn photographed the timestamp on her device. 19 seconds later, Daniel's secondary tablet, the one he used for encrypted internal correspondence, produced a quiet single-tone alert. He looked at the screen. One line of text from a monitoring filter he had set up 3 months ago and never had cause to use: unauthorized secondary routing access terminal 7C0719. His heart rate went up. He kept his face completely neutral. He did not look at Calloway. He sent a one-word message to the secure upload address. Confirmed. At 7:23, the exercise escalated to its second phase. The scenario parameters introduced a simulated field emergency. 2 isolated teams requesting coordination support, their communications routed through the primary relay that was on the diagnostic displays, showing full functionality. The communications officer began processing the simulated coordination requests. Standard procedure. Everything looked right. Team Echo is showing full contact, the officer reported. Team Foxtrot is showing Sir Foxtrot is showing intermittent signal. Run a diagnostic on Foxtrot's frequency band, Marcus said. Diagnostic running, sir. Evelyn watched the diagnostic run. The command center's system analyzed the simulated Foxtrot signal and returned a clean result. Signal interruption attributed to environmental interference. Recommended response: standard frequency adjustment. The officer made the adjustment. The signal appeared to stabilize. And in the real system underneath the false recovery signals in the actual relay architecture that the diagnostic couldn't see, because Calloway's override sequence was masking it. Foxtrot's communication request had never gotten through at all. In a real emergency, Foxtrot's team would be isolated. They would see a status light indicating their communications were functioning. They would not know the relay had failed. They would not know their coordination requests were disappearing into a 17-second gap and never reaching the command center. They would not know until it was too late. Evelyn had seen enough. She picked up the armored device and called Mercer. It's active, she said. The bypass sequence triggered at 0714. Calloway's override at 0719. I have timestamp documentation terminal ID and the independent monitoring feed showing the actual relay status versus what the command center displays are showing. You want to stop the exercise? No, she said. I want you to authorize the full system exposure protocol, right now. A pause. That will shut down every mask display in the building simultaneously. Yes. Every officer in that room will see the actual relay status. That's the point, she said. Do it. Carter, if we do that in the middle of a live exercise. Mercer. Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. Do it. 3 seconds. Authorized, he said, activating in 60 seconds. 60-second countdown from my mark. Mark. She put the phone in her pocket, stood up, and walked to the center of the room. Colonel Hale, she said. Marcus turned from his main display. He read her face, the particular quality of controlled intention in it, and something in him went very still. Stop the exercise, she said. The room reacted the way rooms react when something breaks the expected pattern. A collective flinch, a reorientation of attention, the specific discomfort of professionals being interrupted mid-task. Director Carter. Stop it now, Colonel. I need the room's attention. Marcus looked at her for 1 full second. Then, pause the exercise. All stations hold. The room held. Calloway did not move. He sat at his terminal with his hands flat on the console surface, and his expression arranged into a careful professional neutrality that was, to Evelyn's eye, the single most telling thing in the room. In approximately 40 seconds, Evelyn said to the room, the Oversight Command is going to activate an exposure protocol on this building's diagnostic display system. When it activates, every masked data layer in the communication relay will become visible on your screens. What you are about to see is what your system has actually been doing for the duration of this exercise. Nobody spoke. She looked at the clock on the wall. 20 seconds. What you are currently seeing on your diagnostic displays is a recovery from a relay failure. Emergency Protocol Alpha appears to have activated correctly. The backup relay appears to be functioning. Team Foxtrot's signal appears stable. 10 seconds. None of that is accurate. Every screen in the command center changed. It happened simultaneously across every display surface in the building, the way her authentication profile had propagated 48 hours earlier. But this was not a credentials screen. This was raw system architecture data, 3 layers deep, showing the actual state of the Fort Ravenwood communication relay in real time. The backup relay was not functioning. Team Foxtrot's signal had never reached the command center. The 17-second gap was visible on the display as an active continuous failure, clearly labeled in the diagnostic readout. And in the lower right corner of every screen, a second data layer, the Calloway override sequence from Terminal 7C at 0719, highlighted in red, with a system notation identifying it as an unauthorized non-standard input that had triggered the bypass architecture embedded in the emergency protocol. The room produced a sound that was not quite silence and not quite noise, but existed in the gap between them. A captain near the main board said barely audibly, "The system has been generating false confirmations." Another voice, "Foxtrot never got through. Their requests never." "If this were real," someone said, and then stopped. Because they didn't need to finish the sentence. Every person in that room understood exactly what they were looking at, and every person in that room understood exactly what it meant in a situation that was not a drill. Marcus Hale was looking at the screens. Then he turned and looked at Calloway. The room followed his gaze. Calloway sat at Terminal 7C with his hands still flat on the console. His face, which had maintained its professional neutrality through everything, was doing something different now. Not guilt exactly. Something more complex. The expression of a man who has made a very long series of calculated decisions and has just arrived at the moment where the last calculation failed. "Calloway," Marcus said. His voice was unlike anything Daniel had ever heard from him. Not loud, not cold. Something below cold. Something that had passed through cold and come out the other side. "Sir," Calloway said. "Stand up." Calloway stood. "That override sequence," Marcus said. "Terminal 7C, 0719. Walk me through it." A pause. 4 seconds. 5. "It was a standard diagnostic procedure, sir." "It is not a standard diagnostic procedure," Marcus said. "I know what standard diagnostic procedures look like. I have been running exercises in this command for 4 years. That sequence does not appear in any standard protocol I have reviewed." His voice dropped further. "Try again." Calloway looked at the screens, still showing the red highlighted override. still showing Foxtrot's missing signal, still showing the bypass architecture with its false confirmation generators. I was implementing a routing adjustment, Calloway said, based on anticipated system behavior during high load. Stop. Marcus took one step toward him. Do not make this worse by continuing to lie in front of 200 personnel and a live oversight recording system. The words live oversight recording system hit the room like a second detonation. Several people looked at Evelyn. She was standing at the center of the room, and she had not moved, and her expression had not changed. Colonel Hale, she said, I need to take over the room for a few minutes. Marcus looked at her. Something in his face had the quality of a man who has just realized how wrong he was about several things simultaneously, and who is deciding in real time what to do with that realization. It's your room, Director, he said. She walked to the main display terminal. Major Calloway, she said. 14 months ago, a Joint Chiefs notification establishing this office's secondary oversight channel was transmitted to this command. That notification was routed through the base commander's administrative processing system. It did not appear in Colonel Hale's receipt log. She looked at him. You have deputy administrative authority over the colonel's filing system. You have had it for 3 years. The room was absolutely silent. The 3 communication relay flags from Warrant Officer Gaines were resolved under your authorization. The supporting documentation shows signature codes that do not match your authorized terminal access on 2 of 3 dates. She paused. The bypass sequence currently visible on every screen in this building was installed in the relay architecture 11 months ago. The system access log for that installation traces to a terminal in the communications bay that you accessed on the date in question under a maintenance authorization you filed yourself. Calloway's hands, which had been flat on the console, moved slightly. A small, involuntary shift of weight. And last night, she said, between 2300 and midnight, your personal device transmitted 3 encrypted messages. One of those messages went to a number that belongs to an individual currently under separate investigation by the Defense Intelligence Agency. The room made a sound. Daniel felt it in his chest. The collective impact of a room full of people, understanding simultaneously that what they had believed was a local administrative problem was connected to something considerably larger. I'm not going to name that individual today, Evelyn said. That investigation is active and the name is protected. But I want to be clear about what the evidence currently shows. She looked at Calloway steadily. You have been managing information flow inside this command for over a year. You buried a safety warning that could have cost soldiers their lives. You installed a system designed to show false data during an emergency. And you have been in communication with a person under active federal intelligence investigation. Calloway said nothing. His silence was its own answer. Major Calloway, Marcus Hale said, and his voice had gone to a place that Daniel had never heard it go. Not anger. Something beyond anger. The sound of a man who trusted someone completely and is now standing in the wreckage of that trust. You used my administrative authority. You buried things inside my command using my name and my position. You let me run this base on false information for 14 months. Sir, do not talk. Marcus's voice cracked like a fault line. Do not say another word to me. He turned to the room. Security, escort Major Calloway to administrative holding, now. 2 security officers moved without hesitation. Calloway did not resist. He walked with them through the room past 200 personnel who stepped aside in a silence that had weight to it. The kind of silence that accumulates around a moment that people will remember for the rest of their careers. Daniel watched him go. He thought about the 7 months of observation logs he had written and never sent. The 3 times he had raised the diagnostic issue and been told he was wrong. The night he had decided quietly, and with no certainty about the outcome, to trust the woman with the cracked tablet case over the major with 20 years of institutional authority behind him. He thought about how close it had come to going a different way. After the security officers and Calloway disappeared through the door, the room remained very still for a long moment. Then Marcus Hale turned to Evelyn. The room watched. He stood in front of her broad-shouldered, decorated the same physical presence that had dominated this room for 4 years, and he looked at her with an expression that none of his officers had seen on his face before. 2 days ago, he said, I put my hand on you. I called you. He stopped. Exhaled. In front of everyone in this room. Yes, she said. I had no idea who you were. No. And even if I had... He stopped again. Something working in his jaw. It wouldn't have been acceptable. Regardless of who you were. Evelyn looked at him. Not with triumph. Not with the particular satisfaction of a person who has been proven right. With something more like the patience of someone who has seen this moment enough times to know what it costs the person standing in it. No, she said quietly. It wouldn't have. I'm sorry, he said. It was not the careful diplomatic apology of a man managing optics. It was not the tactical acknowledgement of a commander minimizing damage. It was simply a man in front of his people saying the words that he meant. The room absorbed it. Thank you, Evelyn said. And then after a pause, your command has a serious problem that has been operating inside it for over a year. But most of the people in this room did their jobs, including you once you understood what you were looking at. She looked around the room. Lieutenant Brooks, Warrant Officer Gaines, Captain Reyes, several others I will name in my report. They noticed the right things, and they found a way to communicate them even when the system wasn't designed to let them. Daniel felt something in his chest that he didn't have a word for. The particular feeling of having been seen by the right person at the right moment. The relay system will be repaired today. Evelyn continued addressing the room now, not just Marcus. The bypass architecture will be removed. Gaines will oversee the technical correction with oversight verification. Everything that has been masked for the last 11 months will be documented and submitted to the Joint Chiefs. She let that settle. And then we're going to talk about how this command reports problems going forward. Because the real failure here was not just one man's decisions. It was a system that made it too easy for one person to bury what others were trying to say. She looked at Marcus one more time. Starting with your administrative processing protocol, she said. You should have known about my office 14 months ago. He nodded. I know. That changes today, she said. Yes, he said. It does. Outside the command center in the East Corridor, the security officers were logging Calloway into administrative holding. He sat in the chair they indicated and said nothing and stared at the wall with the expression of a man replaying in sequence every decision that had brought him to this particular room. He thought about the person he had messaged last night. He thought about the instructions he had received. He thought about the moment 11 months ago when he had made the first choice that made all the subsequent choices feel inevitable. And he thought for the first time with any clarity about the soldiers whose safety he had decided to compromise in service of a calculation that had now completely and publicly failed. The wall gave him nothing back. In the command center, Evelyn was already at the terminal pulling up the next layer of documentation. Because Calloway was contained, but the third phone number was not. And the investigation that number connected to was going to require her full attention before the day was over. She had come to Fort Ravenwood to find a vulnerability. She had found one. But underneath it, there was something else. Something that did not begin and end with one major and one falsified maintenance record. Something with a longer reach and a deeper architecture than anything she had uncovered in the last 48 hours. She pulled up the file she had started last night. The name at the top of it was not Calloway's. And the work, the real work, was only just beginning. The file on Evelyn's screen had a name at the top that she had been carrying in the back of her mind for 72 hours, like a stone in a shoe. Not painful enough to stop walking. Present enough to affect every step. Brigadier General Raymond Stokes. Stokes was not at Fort Ravenwood. He had never been assigned to Ravenwood. His connection to this base existed entirely through 3 encrypted messages sent from Calloway's personal device between 2300 and midnight, and through a 14-month timeline that, when you laid it against his career movements and his committee assignments, produced a pattern that Evelyn had learned over 15 years to recognize the way a doctor recognizes a specific kind of lesion. Not proof. Not yet. But the shape of proof. The outline of something that had been deliberately hidden inside institutional complexity, because institutional complexity is the best hiding place most people ever find. She had sent the file to Mercer at 0600 that morning before the exercise began. His response had arrived at 0642. DIA is coordinating. Do not move on Stokes without authorization. Understood. She understood, but she was still building the file. By noon, 3 hours after Calloway had been escorted to administrative holding, the command center at Fort Ravenwood had achieved a different kind of silence than the one that had filled it for the last 2 days. Not the silence of people pretending everything was normal. The silence of people who have seen something real and are still processing what it means. Gaines was in the communications bay with 2 Oversight Command technicians who had arrived by transport at 0900, working through the relay architecture layer by layer, removing the bypass sequence, documenting every modification that had been installed over the last 11 months. He worked with the focused energy of a man who has been telling the truth for a very long time and has finally been heard. And there was something in his movements, the efficiency, the quiet thoroughness that Evelyn found herself watching through the bay window for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, because that was what this work actually looked like. Not the moment in the command center with the screens changing and the room going silent. That moment was real, but it was theater compared to this. 2 technicians and a warrant officer in a communications bay undoing 11 months of deliberate damage line by line, layer by layer. Unglamorous and essential, and completely invisible to everyone who would later tell the story of what had happened at Fort Ravenwood. Daniel found her standing at the bay window at 12:15. "You should eat something," he said. "I had coffee. Coffee isn't food." "It is philosophically." He stood beside her and looked through the window at Gaines and the technicians. "How long will that take?" "They'll have the bypass removed by this afternoon. Full relay restoration by evening. Documentation complete by tomorrow morning." "And Calloway?" "He's being formally processed. JAG has been notified. The DIA is involved because of the 3rd phone number." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Stokes," he said. She looked at him. "I've been in this building for 18 months, he said. Stokes's name came up twice in command correspondence, both times related to infrastructure budget allocations. I flagged it once because the routing of the request seemed unusual, going through logistics instead of finance. Calloway told me it was standard procedure for that category of request." "When?" she said. 9 months ago." She pulled out her tablet. "I need you to write that down. Everything you remember. The dates, the correspondence reference numbers, the specific language Calloway used when he told you it was standard procedure. Will it help the Stokes investigation?" "It will help establish the pattern of how information was managed inside this command," she said, "which is part of what connects Calloway to Stokes. The methodology, the way the suppression worked. That's as important as the content." Daniel nodded, looked back through the window at Gaines. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You're going to regardless," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. "When you walked in 2 days ago, no rank insignia, civilian jacket, cracked tablet case. You already knew what you were going to find, didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment. "I knew what I was looking for," she said. "Finding it is always different from knowing you're looking. But the authentication trigger, the way you set it up, you needed the room to see it at exactly the right moment." "I needed the record to be clean," she said. "What Hale did in that room needed witnesses and camera documentation because it was going to be part of the report. An unreported incident in a command where information suppression was already a documented problem would have been worse than useless. It needed to be seen." "So you let him push you?" She turned and looked at him fully. "I was prepared for multiple possible outcomes," she said carefully. "His reaction was his choice. I didn't manufacture it. I simply didn't prevent it." Daniel held her gaze. "That's a hard way to work." "Yes," she said simply. "It is." She went back to her tablet. He went to find food, and also to write down everything he remembered about the Stokes correspondence, because that was what she had asked him to do, and he had decided somewhere in the last 72 hours that when Evelyn Carter asked you to do something, you did it. At 1400, Marcus Hale knocked on the secondary operations room door. Evelyn had returned there after noon to work without interruption, which was a preference the command center had begun to accommodate without being asked. The Northeast Terminal now had a kind of informal exclusion zone around it. People gave it space the way people give space to something they have learned to read correctly. "Come in," she said. He entered and sat without being invited this time. The gesture was small, but she noticed the difference between the man who had needed to be told to sit 2 days ago and the man who was simply quietly present now. "The relay will be fully restored tonight," he said. "I know. Gaines updated me. The JAG officer has completed the preliminary processing on Calloway." He paused. "He's talking." She looked up. "He asked for consideration in exchange for a full account," Marcus said. "JAG has taken it to the DIA. Apparently what he's offering goes beyond Ravenwood." "What is he offering?" "I don't have the details. The DIA is handling it at a level above my clearance." He looked at her steadily. "But it involves Stokes." She had known this was coming. She had built the file knowing it was coming, and still hearing it said plainly in a room at Fort Ravenwood 2 days after she had walked in carrying a tablet with a cracked case landed with a particular weight that she gave herself exactly 3 seconds to feel before filing it away where it belonged. "Good," she said. "Calloway said something else," Marcus said. "Before JAG took over. I was present for the initial interview." He stopped, something working in his jaw. "He said he chose Ravenwood because of me. Because my command style, the way I ran information flow, the way I expected my senior staff to manage upward reporting, created a structure that was easy to operate inside without detection." The room was very quiet. "He used your authority as the cover," Evelyn said. "He used my blindness," Marcus said. "Let's be accurate about what it was." She looked at him. The man who had pushed her in front of 260 people was sitting across from her, saying the most honest thing she had heard a senior officer say in 5 years of doing this work. And he was saying it without being asked, without being prompted, without any visible calculation about how it would land. "That is accurate," she said. "I want to know what I missed," he said. "Not for the report, not to defend myself. I want to understand how someone operated inside my command for 14 months without my knowledge, what I failed to see, what I failed to ask." He looked at her directly. "I need you to tell me." She studied him for a long moment. "You built a command culture where senior officers resolved problems before they reached you," she said. "That's efficient. It's also in the wrong hands a perfect system for preventing information from reaching you. You trusted Calloway because he was competent, and because trusting him freed you to focus on larger operational concerns. That's reasonable. What made it dangerous was that there was no secondary path, no mechanism for someone below Calloway to reach you directly if Calloway was the problem. Brooks tried," Marcus said. "Gaines tried. 3 times. And both of them were managed back down before anything reached your level," she said. "Because the system you built didn't have a bypass for that. The only bypass was this office. And Calloway made sure this office's notification never reached you." Marcus was quiet. "How do I fix that?" he said. "You're asking me. You just spent 2 days finding every fracture in my command," he said. "If anyone knows what the structural repair looks like, it's you." She sat back. It was the first time she had changed her posture in a way that suggested something other than task focus. Something that in a person less controlled might have been called a moment of decision. "You build an anonymous reporting channel," she said. "Not to you, to an independent oversight function. You make clear to every person in this command, from your senior staff to your junior officers to your warrant officers, that the channel exists and that using it carries no professional penalty. You review your administrative processing system, and you add a secondary confirmation requirement for any document that is marked as received on your behalf by a deputy." She paused. "And you promote Brooks." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "He's 18 months in." "He spent 7 months documenting a systemic problem that no one above him was willing to look at," she said. "He did it carefully, accurately, and without overstepping. And when the moment came, he made the right call. That is the officer you want your junior staff learning from." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "And Gaines. Gaines should have his 3 flag resolutions reviewed and formally corrected in the official record," she said. "His assessments were right. The record should say so." Marcus nodded slowly. The kind of nod that is not agreement in the moment, but is the beginning of a longer process of integrating something. "Your report," he said. "The official findings. How bad is it, for you personally?" "Yes. You will receive a formal notation for the incident in the command center," she said. "The physical contact and the conduct preceding it. That notation will be permanent." He received that without expression. "The broader command failure," she continued, "will be documented as a systemic vulnerability that was exploited by a bad actor operating within your trusted staff. The report will note the absence of a secondary reporting pathway and will recommend structural changes. It will also note your cooperation, your candor during the review, and the corrective actions you have already initiated." She looked at him. "It is not a career-ending report, Colonel. It is an honest one." Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than relief. The particular quality of a man who has spent 2 days not knowing what truth was going to cost him and has just found out it will cost something real but survivable. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me for an honest report," she said. "That's the minimum this work requires." He stood. At the door he paused. "Director Carter," he said. "The first morning, when you walked in, I looked at you and I saw what I expected to see. What I decided you were before you said a single word." "I know," she said. "How many times does that happen to you?" She considered the question. "Often enough that I stopped being surprised by it," she said. "Rarely enough that I still notice when someone decides to look again." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he left. At 16:30, Mercer called. "Calloway's statement has been processed," he said. "DIA is moving on Stokes. Full investigation, formal authorization effective as of an hour ago. Based on Calloway's account, plus your documentation, plus 7 months of Brooks' observation logs, plus Gaines's technical analysis, plus the independent monitoring data from the exercise." A pause. "Carter, you built a complete evidentiary package. Calloway's cooperation filled in the motive and the communication chain, but the structural case was already there before he said a word." "Will it hold?" she said. "The DIA thinks so. They've been watching Stokes for separate reasons for 8 months. Your material gives them the operational connection they were missing." She sat with that. "The relay vulnerability," Mercer said. "If it had activated during a real emergency, do we know how bad it could have been?" "Gaines modeled it," she said. "Depending on the scenario, you're looking at a window where rescue coordination appears functional while actually failing. Teams requesting support would receive no response but see a status indicator showing their message had been received. Commanders would see confirmation signals showing the system was working. In a complex field operation, the delay in understanding what was actually happening could be—" She stopped. "Significant." How many people knew about the vulnerability? In this building, every person whose flag was closed without being fixed. Every person who was told their diagnostic was wrong. And Calloway who built it, and Stokes who apparently requested something that made Ravenwood's communication infrastructure a point of interest for reasons I don't fully have visibility into yet. "We'll have more once DIA completes their initial interviews," Mercer said. "Carter, how are you?" The question landed differently than questions usually landed from Mercer. He asked it rarely enough that when he did it carried weight. "I'm fine," she said. "You've been on site for 72 hours. "The work isn't finished. The acute phase is finished," he said. "The relay is being restored. Calloway is in custody. The Stokes investigation is active. Brooks and Gaines are protected. What's left is documentation, and documentation can happen from a location where you've slept in a bed rather than on top of a communications device." "1 more day," she said. "1 more day," he agreed. "Then I'm pulling you out." She ended the call and turned back to the file. At 1800, Daniel came back. He set a sandwich on the desk beside her tablet and sat down without asking. She looked at the sandwich, then at him. "It's turkey," he said. The commissary was out of everything else worth eating. She picked it up. They sat in silence for a moment. "Stokes is being investigated," she said. Daniel nodded. He had been expecting it. "Your logs," she said. "The 7 months of observation documentation." Mercer described it this afternoon as part of the evidentiary package that made the Stokes investigation possible. "I want you to know that." He looked at the table for a moment. "I almost deleted them," he said. "In January. After the third time I raised the diagnostic issue and was told I was wrong, I sat in front of my terminal for about 20 minutes thinking about what the point was." "What stopped you?" "I didn't have a good answer for what I would do instead," he said. "If I deleted them, I still knew what I knew. I couldn't unknow it. So keeping the record seemed better than not keeping it, even if I could never figure out how to use it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's exactly right," she said. "The record is never wasted, even when it feels like it's going nowhere." He looked at her. "Is that from experience?" 15 years of it," she said. He nodded slowly. "What happens now to the command to Hale?" "The command gets rebuilt," she said. "New reporting pathways, new administrative protocols. The relay system is already being repaired. Hale stays in command with a notation on his record and a different understanding of what his senior staff is permitted to manage on his behalf." She paused. "He asked the right questions today. He heard the answers. That matters." "You trust him." "I trust that he understands now what the cost of not seeing clearly actually is," she said. "That's more reliable than trust in my experience." Daniel thought about that. "And you? What happens to you after this?" She picked up the sandwich again. "There's another command with a different problem and a different set of people who think the person walking in the door is someone they can dismiss." She said it without self-pity, without drama, without anything except the simple factual quality that she used for everything. "That's what the work is." "Does it ever?" He stopped himself. "Go ahead. Does it ever feel like enough?" he said. "You find the problem. You fix the system. You protect the people who were trying to do the right thing. And then you go somewhere else and start again. Does any of it feel like it stays?" She was quiet long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "Gaines ran 3 diagnostics," she said finally. "He wrote 3 flags. He was told he was wrong 3 times, and today he spent 6 hours in that communications bay with 2 oversight technicians removing a bypass sequence from a system that he had been trying to protect for 11 months. She looked at Daniel steadily. "Ask him tonight if it feels like enough." Daniel nodded. Something in his chest settled. The particular feeling of a question that has been there for a long time finally meeting an answer that fits it. "One more thing," Evelyn said. She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and produced a business card. Not a standard military contact card. A card with the Oversight Command insignia and a direct line. She set it on the table beside the sandwich wrapper. "If you find something in the next 6 months and you don't know how to route it, you call that number." He looked at the card. "That's your direct line," he said. "Yes." "You give this to everyone you review." "No," she said. He picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then put it in his pocket. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just keep writing the logs." He left. The following morning, Evelyn stood in the command center for the last time before her transport arrived at 0900. The relay system was fully restored. Gaines had completed the final verification at 2200 the previous night and sent a one-line message to her secure upload address. Clean. Everything is clean. She had read it sitting on the edge of the bed in her temporary quarters and felt the specific quiet satisfaction of something that had been broken being made whole. The command center was operating at normal morning tempo. Officers at stations. Reports being processed. Communication channels running clear and true, without a 17-second gap, without a bypass architecture feeding false confirmations to every screen in the building. It looked like it was supposed to look. Marcus Hale found her near the northeast terminal where she had worked for 3 days. "Transport's ready when you are," he said. "I know." She was looking at the main communication display. The relay status indicator showed green across every sector, clean and accurate and real. "The anonymous reporting channel," Marcus said. "I've already had my executive assistant begin the implementation process. Independent routing through the Inspector General's office with a copy flagged to your secondary oversight channel. Good, she said. Brooks, he paused. I'm recommending him for accelerated advancement review. Effective this quarter. That's the right call. And Gaines's flag resolutions will be formally corrected in the official record by end of week, with a commendation notation. Also the right call. He was quiet for a moment. Then, can I ask you something? Go ahead. The day you walked in. The jacket, the civilian tablet, no insignia. He looked at her carefully. Was any of it accidental? She picked up her bag from the chair beside the terminal. The cracked tablet went into the front pocket. The armored device went into the main compartment. The jacket is comfortable, she said. The tablet does everything I need it to do. The insignia is in my credentials folder, which is where credentials belong until someone needs to see them. He studied her. And walking into a command full of officers who were immediately going to dismiss you. When people dismiss you immediately, she said, they stop managing how they present themselves. They stop controlling what they show. They behave the way they actually behave. She met his eyes. That's the most useful thing I can have in the first hour of a review. Marcus received that. You let me dismiss you, he said. On purpose. I let you make your own choices, she said. Everything you did in that room you did because that's who you are when you're not being careful. That's valuable information, Colonel. And the fact that who you are when you're not being careful is a man who 2 days later sits across from the person he wronged and asks to understand what he missed, that's also valuable information. He held her gaze. I'll do better, he said, not as a promise to her, as a statement to himself made in her presence, which is a different and more binding thing. I know, she said. She walked toward the door. Director Carter, he said. She stopped. The next time Oversight sends someone here, he said, I'll know what to do. She turned back just enough to look at him. The next time they send someone here, she said, I hope they walk in and find a command where there's nothing to find. Then she walked out. The transport was waiting. She got in. The base grew smaller behind her, and she looked at the documentation folder on her armored device, complete thorough every layer of the last 72 hours accounted for, and she thought about the relay system running clean through Fort Ravenwood's communication network. She thought about Gaines in the bay, running his verification, seeing the system say what it actually meant for the first time in 11 months. She thought about Daniel Brooks at his desk, still writing logs that the right people were now positioned to read. She thought about what it costs to be the person who walks into rooms where no one expects anything of her. And she thought about what it means to do that work anyway. Not because anyone sees it. Not because anyone will know the name of the woman who spent 3 days in a secondary operations room with a cracked tablet and a filing system that worked through channels nobody had bothered to learn about. But because somewhere in this country, in a field operation that will never make a news report, a soldier is going to call for support through a relay that is now clean and true. And the call is going to go through. And that soldier is going to come home. That is what the work is for. That is what it has always been for. Not the moment on the screens, not the silence in the command center, not the career notations and the investigations and the institutional reckoning. Though all of those things matter. All of those things are necessary. All of those things are part of the same structure. But underneath all of it, at the bottom of every report and every flag and every observation log written by a junior officer who almost deleted everything in January, is a simple and irreducible truth. The quietest person in the room was the only one who understood from the first moment she walked through the door exactly what was at stake. And she had never needed anyone to know that. She had only needed it to be true.